Bum bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum.
Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the rustling trees. They are in the groaning woods. They are in the crying grass. They are in the moaning rocks. The dead are not under the earth. So listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead have a pact with the living. They are in the woman's breast. They are in the wailing child. They are with us in our homes. They are with us in the crowd. The dead have a pact with the living. So listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters.
Thank you, choir. I want to share with you a little bit about this poet who inspired that song that Ysaye Barnwell did, Birago Diop. Here's a picture of him. Birago Diop was a Senegalese poet and storyteller whose work restored general interest in African folk tales and promoted him to one of the most outstanding African Francophone writers. All of his writings are in French, and he lived in France for a while. A renowned veterinarian, diplomat, and leading voice of the African diaspora literary movement, Diop exemplified the African Renaissance man. Here's a little more about his writings. During his work as the head of the government's cattle inspection service for several regions in Senegal and Mali, he was introduced to traditional folk tales, most of which he committed to memory. These served as the main inspiration for much of his literary work. Indeed, most of his poems and tales have their roots in oral African traditions, generally recited to a group at night by a professional storyteller called a griot. Folk tales were repeated in different places by the people who heard them. So this is one that he remembered hearing about, and he did this wonderful poem called Souffles, or breaths, or some interpreted as spirits. And what I'm going to do now is invite you, before I share the rest of my message, I'm going to actually read his poem and then share more message, but I invite you to take a couple of breaths so that I can stop my screen share. and read this poem for you. Listen to things more often than beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the sighs of the bush. This is the ancestors breathing. Those who are dead are not ever gone. They are in the darkness that grows lighter and in the darkness that grows darker. The dead are not down in the earth. They are in the trembling of the trees, in the groaning of the woods, in the water that runs, in the water that sleeps. They are in the hut. They are in the crowd. The dead are not dead. Listen to things more often than beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the bush that is sighing. This is the breathing of ancestors who have not gone away, who are not under the earth, who are not really dead. Those who are dead are not ever gone. They are in the woman's breast, in the wailing of a child, in the burning of a log, in the moaning rock, in the weeping grasses, in the forest and the home. The dead are not dead. Listen more often to things than to beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen to the wind, the bush that is sobbing. This is the ancestors breathing. Each day they renew ancient bonds that hold fast, binding our lot to their law, to the will of the spirit stronger than we, to the spell of our dead who are not really dead, whose covenant binds us to life, whose authority binds to their will, the will of spirits that stir in the bed of the river, on the banks of the river, the breathing of spirits who moan in the rock and weep in the grasses. Spirits inhabit the darkness that lightens, the darkness that darkens, the quivering tree, the murmuring wood, the water that runs and the water that sleeps. Spirits much stronger than we. The breathing of the dead are not really dead, of the dead who are not really gone, of the dead now no more in the earth. Listen to things more often than beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the bush that is sobbing. This is the ancestors breathing. Let's take 3 deep breaths with them before I share more with you. So what happens when we die? Well, it sort of depends on how quick it is. But for most of us who have what some call a natural death, our organs begin to shut down one by one. Our breathing becomes more labored and rattling. And at some point, our breathing stops and our heart quits beating. And that life force, that energy, as heat and light are energy, that energy, which some call our soul, leaves our body. And where does it go? There are some that say it hangs out a while in that space. Some say that it enters another being, often an animal that sometimes shows up in the next day or two to bid you goodbye. The day after my son Fred died, there was a snake on my kitchen table about 2.5 feet long. I have no idea how a snake could be on my kitchen table. I asked my Facebook friends how I could safely remove it and followed their advice to safely get it out to the woods. Now, some shared with me that this was Fred coming to see me and let me know he was okay. But Fred knows I get nervous around snakes. He wouldn't do that. On the other hand, Fred always liked to pick on me, so maybe. There are others that say this spirit, if you will, that leaves the body is reincarnated into another being at its birth. Of course, there are others who believe this spirit goes to the good place or the bad place. And then there are others who believe it simply joins with other energies in this universe. Because I'm a religious naturalist, I lean in this direction, and perhaps that's why I'm drawn to Diop's poem and Barnwell's song. My theology differs from that of the old storytellers who shared these ideas with Diop, but they have a kinship. These old storytellers were sharing a common view of many earth-centered folks, that there are spirits in the trees, the water, the fire, the wind, and all things. This view has been called animism. Animism encompasses the belief that all material phenomena have agency, that there exists no hard and fast distinction between the spiritual and physical or material world, and that soul or spirit or sentience exists not only in humans, but also in other animals, plants, rocks, geographic features such as mountains or rivers, and other entities of the natural environments. There are water sprites, vegetation deities, tree sprites, etc. And some use animistic concepts in thinking about the whole earth. The Gaia hypothesis, also known as Gaia theory or Gaia principle, proposes that all organisms and their inorganic surroundings on Earth are closely integrated to form a single and self-regulating complex system, maintaining the conditions for life on our planet. It's named after the Greek goddess Gaia, which means land or earth in ancient Greek, and it's a personification of the earth, Mother Earth, if you will. And because these scientists view Earth regulating herself to sustain life, those of us who lean toward the metaphysical or the metaphorical can view the earth as living and breathing. We sing about her at Women's Spirit on the Mountain. You can join me if you know it. Gaia, oh Gaia, 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 oh Gaia, living, breathing earth. Yes, even those of us who do not have a supernatural worldview often open our minds through imagination and can suspend our non-belief enough to immerse ourselves into a good ritual or a good book or movie that uses animistic themes. My all-time favorite book, Skinny Legs and All by Tom Robbins, includes these characters who are animated: a spoon, a dirty sock, a philosophical gender-neutral can of beans, a sacred stick, and a conch shell. Robbins uses these words to help us move to accepting his animate characters. Here's a quote. The inertia of objects is deceptive. The inanimate world appears static, dead to humans only because of our neuromuscular chauvinism. Look deeper. You'll need a magnifying glass. On the atomic and subatomic levels, weird electrical forces are crackling and flaring, and amorphous particles are spinning and simultaneously forward and backward, sideways, and forever at speeds so incalculable that expressions such as arrival and departure and have a nice day become meaningless. It is on these levels that magic occurs. So yes, Diop's poem appeals to my imagination, but also I connect to it from a more scientific view. If indeed the energies that leave our departed ones' bodies move back into this world, then they do become a part of the energies that can be found in the fire, the waters, the winds, and more. Now, what about the premise that we can be inspired by the breathing of our ancestors or the sounds of nature? Absolutely. Most of us are able to gain insight by listening to nature or even our own breath. So that has meaning for me as well. But what about the whole idea of connecting to our ancestors in this or other ways? And why would we want to connect to our ancestors? Unless we were trying to gain admission to the Daughters of the American Revolution or some such group, most of us were not concerned about connecting to our ancestry until Alex Haley's book Roots made us think about the possibilities. Now there are many who spend much of their time tracing their ancestry. I really had no time nor interest in this until I took that DNA test, and Ancestry.com began to share hints with me to pull me in. I shared with my mom how much I'd found out about the names of many of our ancestors, and she said, "Good, now you have more people you can blame." Well, I had never thought about it like that. Actually, I don't ever remember shaming my parents for anything they may have passed on to me. But my mama and I have both commented on knowing that we inherited some of her mother's tendencies. My grandmother, Mattie, could be somewhat cruel, especially to her loved ones. And occasionally something will come out of my mom's mouth or my own that sounds like something my grandmother would say. We recognize this and try to keep Miss Mattie in her place. But occasionally, I feel the need to call her up. "Come on, Mattie, I need you for this one." There are cultures, though, that revere their ancestors. And Diop's words, borrowed and translated from the griot, share with those folks that they can connect by listening to nature. The ancestors' breath is there. Now, I say revere rather than worship because in my research, I discovered that using the words ancestor worship is frowned upon. Here's a quote from an encyclopedia on the matter. Most cultures who practice ancestor veneration do not call it ancestor worship. In English, the word worship usually, but not always, refers to the reverent love and devotion accorded a deity or God. However, in other cultures, this act of worship does not confer any belief that the departed ancestors have become some kind of deity. Rather, the act is a way to express filial deity, devotion, and respect, and look after ancestors in their afterlives, as well as seek their guidance for their living descendants. In this regard, there are many cultures and religions who have similar practices. Some may visit the graves of their parents or other ancestors, leave flowers, and pray to them in order to honor and remember them, or pray to the saints for intercession, those kinds of things, while also asking their ancestors to continue to look after them. I know some folks like to go to the cemeteries and talk to their departed ones. And if being near the remains helps them, that's great. I'm not much of a cemetery person myself, so I'll follow the words lifted up by Diop and Barnwell and just meet with them as I walk the labyrinth in the woods behind our home in Statesboro or walk the beach at St. Simon's. And I'll listen. Will you? Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath. Whoosh. Ah. Whoosh. Listen and breathe with your ancestors. Blessed be.